Hello and welcome to the Emotion of Word podcast, where we place not plague. I don't know why we plague something, but we definitely place emotion at the heart of the people, the processes, and the place of work. And today we're focusing on both the people and the place element, I think, because our guest today is a thought leader for mental health, for workplace wellbeing, equality, and inclusion. And as the CEO of Mental Health First Aid England, he writes on their blog, contributes to media articles, as well as speaking and facilitating mental health and wellbeing events. So I think it's safe to say we've got a credible voice on the podcast today. So let's welcome to the podcast, Simon Blake. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Phil. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, thank you very much for coming on. When we had our off-air conversation, I really, really enjoyed it, and I think the audience are going to enjoy our episode today as well. So yeah, really good. That's really good. And as always for this podcast, then we begin with our unexpected yet innocuous question. And what I'd like to ask today, and when I used in the question has got the word recently, and I will leave you to interpret the word recently as broadly as you like. So with the context that you can interpret recently as broad as you like, what have you done recently for the first time?
Ooh, what have I done recently for the first time? I went on a horseback safari in South Africa before Christmas.
Wow.
So I was 50 in January, and on my 40th birthday, I wrote down 10 things that I wanted to either change or do by the time I was 50. And the only thing I hadn't done when I was about 9 months out was go on a horseback safari. So, and I couldn't actually really afford to do it. So I found one to volunteer on. And
yeah,
it was amazing. It was really, really amazing.
Oh, wow. So what was the voluntary element then? Was that for a particular cause or?
No, so you're actually volunteering on looking after the horses and supporting people on the rides. So it was very hands-on, horse care.
Fantastic. You know what? I've never ridden a horse ever. I've not even been. I've not been on
a. My hobby.
No, I think I've been on a donkey on Weston-super-Mare Beach, and probably on a Lincolnshire beach at some point in my time. But yeah, I don't think I've ever been on a horse. And what is it about horse riding that makes it one of your favourite things to do then?
It always has been. I remember when I was about 5 or 6, so I grew up in Cornwall, and we went to family friend's house, and they had ponies, and I was put on a pony called Toby, and I can remember it vividly now, both how he looked, where we were, and the feeling. And I never wanted to get off. And we had another family friend with us, and she was called Tanya, and she was the same age as me. And when it was the end of my turn, it was her turn to get onto Toby. And I've never felt so much something in all of my life when she got on him, and I've just loved it ever since.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love that you can remember it so vividly as well. That's amazing. That's brilliant. So my thing that I did for the first time recently was some demolition. So over the weekend, we had an outbuilding that was, well, we bought our house where we live now is nearly 6 years ago. And when we bought it, we said, this is one of the first things we need to do because it's in a state of disrepair. 6 years later, it was still going, but the roof was just bowing so badly. And the bottom sort of 2 runs of planks of wood were missing on one side of it as well. It was in a very poor state of repair. So I did some demolition on the weekend. And yeah, it was good. I wasn't sure I would be capable of doing the demolition that I did, but I did. Managed to take the outbuilding down in about, 3.5, 4 hours, I think. But the downside was the skip wasn't here to fill. So the skip came Wednesday for me to fill up, and I think it took me nearly 5 hours to move the demolished outbuilding into the skip last night. So my legs and my shoulders are very achy today from wheelbarrowing. Lots of
you did it all by hand.
Yeah, I did it all by hand. Yeah, so I had a bit of help with some tools. And my next door neighbour's a carpenter, so when it got to the brace at the top of the roof, because it was a wooden building, so it wasn't a kind of a brick building, but it was a wooden structure. But when it got to the brace in the middle, I had my hand saw out trying to saw through the brace, and he was like, "Should I just get my circular saw for you, Phil?" I was like, "If you wouldn't mind, that'd be amazing." So he came out with a circular saw and then just took it out. But it was good. So I had a little bit of help with on that front. But yeah, it was good. I just had my earphones in, had all my PPE on, and away I went. So yeah, that was good fun.
Amazing. Have you heard of the Minack Theatre in Cornwall?
Yes, I've been a couple of times actually. Yeah, my parents took me there twice.
Did you read the story of how the woman who owned it and made it did it all by hand? So
no, I don't remember that at all.
Her in the cafe and shop at the top of the Minack as you go out, there is a storyboard of how single-handedly managed to make that theatre in the side of the cliff with a wheelbarrow and who knows what other equipment. But I just couldn't believe it when I saw it.
Wow, no, I don't. So no, I don't remember that at all. No, to my parents, when I suppose I was young, maybe like early teens. Yeah, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe something like that. We went a couple of times, but no, I don't remember that at all. No, that's amazing. No, I was quite proud of my achievement because so one of the other innocuous questions that I had on my list today was are you handy? Because I'm not handy at all. So at least not what I would define as handy, which is kind of DIY, putting stuff up and things like that. I'm terrible at all those things. So I was quite proud of myself actually for taking it down and not injuring myself or getting anything wrong in the process. So yeah.
Yeah, I am full of admiration, I have to say. I mean, I had to take YouTube out the other day to find out where to put the free freeze, whatever you put in a car. The
antifreeze thing.
Cool freeze, whatever it is. And then I thought, oh well, I'm here. I'll just have a look and see where you refill the windscreen wipers as well. So I've done that a few times since then. But yeah, no, I am super appalling at anything, and actually have no desire either. I have to say, it's not. It's that sort of thing where if I wanted to do it, I'm sure I could. It's not. I don't think it's beyond my abilities, but I have no desire whatsoever. I think other people enjoy it. I should let them have the pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I'll take that link then. I'll take that segue in terms of the enjoyment of work. I also agree with you is really important. So there's certain things that I'm really good at, and there's things that I'm not. And I'd rather enlist the support of somebody who enjoys and is good at that thing that needs doing, rather than sort of forcing myself to try and do it. And I think one of the things that really stuck with me, I think, when I mentioned when we spoke off air, was your belief about how work has the power to be great for people and their health. And similarly, I think the people in work then also hold a great deal of power to make things happen. And I'm conscious that that's my summary. So is there something in there that I've sort of misunderstood or misrepresented, would you say?
No, I think that's a really good summary. And and I really believe that it's so important that we think about work as something that can be designed in a way which is good for us and is health promoting. And I would put it, I guess, into 3 buckets. One is how do we support the well-being of everybody? How do we make sure that people get support when they need it? We will all go through periods which may be about mental health, it may be about physical health, it may be about life circumstances where we might need additional support or flexibility or adjustment. And then there is how do we make sure that work is designed in a way which everybody, somebody with a serious mental illness, enduring mental illness, can thrive and be able to work well. And for me, I guess that sense of well-being and productivity fuel one another. So often we talk about getting the balance right, and I subscribe to a view that It's about really ensuring that they are fueling one another. That well-being is the Bunsen burner under productivity, and productivity is a Bunsen burner under well-being as well.
And for you, what's that? How do they feed each other then? So so thinking about that description of how they need to feed each other and inform each other. How for you do they do that?
So what we know about work, or what I think I know about work, is that what powers us at work is a sense of connection to the purpose. It's about the people that we're connected with. It's about the line manager. It's about a belief in what we are doing. So if we create the conditions in which we've got the tools, we've got the frameworks, we've got the time, we've got the ability, we've got the support around us, then that's exciting. Some of the best things that have been done in my working life have been ultimately reasonably challenging. They've stretched me. They've given me some bumps and lumps along the way. But that sense of achievement has really given a sense of purpose, of confidence, of ability to make a difference, which in itself then says, okay, I can do that. And taking that out into our personal lives, or doing things that we've done in our personal lives. You've done a demolition. If you can do a demolition, what can you do at work? What can you do outside of work? What are those unknown abilities which we've had, or those undiscovered talents or things that we might enjoy? So work can be tough, and I don't want to underplay that, and it can be tough for all sorts of reasons, but it can also be a playground in which we get to explore and develop and grow and meet new people and be challenged and have great ideas and see those ideas through to fruition. And that applies wherever you are. One of my first ever jobs was making burgers around agricultural shows when I was growing up. And Budge, who was the person who owned the stand, was always saying, how can we make it better? How can we get the line that's was quite long quicker? How can we make sure that we're not wasting spaces? And was really believing in and pushing us as all relatively young teenagers, fresh into workspace, and would do the debriefs and would say, would help us to think about what we might want to do the next day. And those sorts of experiences, have helped shape me. And those experiences have been in a range of different jobs. When I worked at Gap, the manager, John, would just talk about what we were doing, how we were doing it, the way that we would help each other. And various managers and colleagues right the way through my career have done that. And that creates great sense of joy, belief, purpose, and that fuels well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I worked. So your burger story really reminded me of when my first. So I worked in Greg's, the bakers, first, and I was 15, I think. I was there from 15 till 17, I think. And then it was when I went to McDonald's that I felt that connection to other people for the first time. I think because the bakers was always quite small, so there was only kind of 2, 3, 4 people on, in a store, maybe 5 or 6 on a Saturday if it was really busy. But when I was in McDonald's, there was, you could have 8, 10 people in the kitchen plus another 12, 15 on front counter plus 5 on lobby. So you had you had a team of 30 people, I suppose, in a way, trying to deliver a service to the customer that was coming in. And that sense of connection with each other, I suppose we had a connection to a goal or a purpose, I suppose, in terms of trying to achieve some targets. So I remember one shift when we cooked enough food for the store to take £2,000 of revenue in an hour. So this was, I'm not sure when this would have been. It would have been 1997, maybe. I think a Big Mac meal at that point was £2.88. So we'd had to have sold a lot of Big Mac meals to make our £2,000 in an hour. but I remember the kind of the whooping and the hollering and the sense of achievement that we had when we'd done that, to find out that we'd done that £2,000 hour. Because I think the hour before we did like 1,850 or something. We were close, but we weren't there. And then I remember we all kind of doubled down and really went for it in the second hour. It also it created another kind of shift point in my life, but that's a different story. But yeah, I remember that feeling of connection to my colleagues, to the team that were around me, to a goal that we were trying to achieve. And it was hard, and I was probably a bit smelly by the end of that shift, to be fair. But it was it was very much it was good work. It was hard work, but it was rewarding work. So yeah.
Interesting. And I just, as you talked about Greg's, I've just got a new bank account where you get a Greg's treat every week, and I'm on a diet. So going back to the horses, I have to keep my weight down to a certain level because I still compete, and I'm now over 50, so it's getting harder to do so. And so this Greg's treat sits on my phone every week, and I sort of just try to walk past a new form of horror. Yeah,
I still struggle to resist a steak bake. I do love a steak bake. One of my favourite things that Greg's does. So I suppose you in both of your examples there, where you think about Gap and did you say it was Bunce?
Budge.
The name of the person?
Budge.
Sorry, Budge the Burger Man. Budge the Burger Man. So we think about Budge and the manager at Gap then. So in this kind of harnessing of the power that work has to be good for people and their health, whether it be physical or mental health. I suppose part of me wonders, is it a risk to overplay? Is there a risk in overplaying the role of the manager in that, or is actually the manager really crucial and fundamental to that harnessing of that power that work can be great for people and their health?
I definitely don't think you can overplay the importance of the manager. I think what we mustn't do is ignore the importance of peers. So often we talk about leadership and management, and I think we less often talk about the importance of peers. But sticking to managers, what the Chartered Management Institute does tell us is that most managers have not been trained to be a manager by the time they get to a management position. So I think it's about 88% of people become a manager by accident, and I'm certainly one of those people. And if so often people become managers, I think, because it's a route to progression when there are less other routes to progression. But actually, some people probably shouldn't be managers because they may not have the skills or the time or the patience or the desire to be a good people manager. And for me, if you're going to be a good manager, you've got to have the time, you've got to have the skills, but you also have to want to know the people in your team, to know enough about people to understand them, to be able to know when they are feeling well and doing well, and to be able to feed that back and know when something may not be quite right, and how do you lean into that conversation as well. But what the research also tells us is that people will often join an organisation but leave a manager. And so your question about do we overplay that? No, I don't think we can overplay it. But how do we make sure that managers can do the job well? Well, firstly, to make sure that it is seen as about being in a relationship with a person and trying to help them to do their best, and making sure that enough time and attention is spent deliberately to enable us to do that. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, so one of the research papers that we published, I think it was back in 2023, was called "Managers Feel the Pinch." So we did some research into emotion expression, so the extent to which people felt they could express how they feel across a range of emotions, whether that be pleasure, overwhelm, or frustration. we correlated that with some well-being outcomes in terms of pleasure that people find in their work, the extent to which work kept them awake at night, and the extent to which they felt stressed in the last 4 weeks. And what we found was that managers in particular, the title of the paper, I guess, gave it away in terms of they seem to be kind of feeling that pinch in terms of I can't necessarily express my emotions upwards to senior management or leadership because I'm concerned about my credibility and how that will come across. And similarly, I can't express it down to my team because I'm worried that I might come across as putting stuff on them or coming across as weak and that I can't cope. And we didn't talk about peers in that research actually, which is something that I'm now reflecting and thinking, well, maybe we need to do that. And I was really interested in that point that you were making. I know you moved away from it because of my question, and if it's okay, I'd like to bring us back to it, if that's all right. So, what for you? Because I think they're an often overlooked group, as you said, really. So, what for you might be the role that peers can have in that, in this element of helping work or harnessing the power of work to be great for people and their health?
So we are social beings. Yeah, the world of work has changed enormously, hasn't it, over the last 4 years? And one of the things that worries me most about that, particularly for younger people, is the move away from being in an office and the move to being at home, I think removes that opportunity to make great friends, to build relationships with people in work. You can just lean over and say, could you read this for me and give me a little bit of input, or to hear and learn from one another. If I look back and think about my work in my 20s and 30s, what I remember is the great people. If you push me a little bit harder, I might remember some of the projects and the things that I worked on. But mostly it will be, the fun times with people, the camaraderie, the moments that we won a funding bid and we whooped together like you did, with the $2,000 an hour, and all of those sorts of things. So, that ability to work as part of a team, the ability to learn, develop, bounce ideas off people is magic, really. And whether then in that going to and doing things outside of work, the social element of work also feels really important. So when I talk about work designed well being good for us, I'm not necessarily talking about turning on the computer in my kitchen as I've done now. I'm talking about that whole experience of leaving the house, seeing people. I've got a great commute from London Bridge, walk across to Tower Bridge, and there's a really nice bit of the South Bank to walk along. Seeing people in the office, hearing people laugh, having those accidental moments where you do something or you help somebody, and doing the work is all part for me of that bigger picture. And I sometimes could be in danger of saying the office space was utopia and sounding as though that I want to go back to those heady days. And I recognise that there are all sorts of benefits which people experience of this new way of working. But that power of people and friendship development and learning and growing and listening to, I remember listening to people answering a call and talking about something and thinking, I'm going to use those words. That's brilliant. And I still use some of those words and phrases and ways of addressing things now. And the manager in that is an important role. But if I've got a letter and I've drafted it or a document and I send it to my manager, I would often be sending it for approval rather than for comment. Whereas you send it to a peer and you're asking them for their ideas and their input, not for approval per se. So there's different power dynamics and different roles and responsibilities. And maybe it's okay for them not to be named. But when we talk about culture, that it is what's the phrase that people use? Culture is the worst, but your culture is defined by the worst behaviour you're willing to accept.
Yep.
And that's everybody's behaviour. Everybody contributes to caring and supporting. At MHFA England, we have a platform called Bonusly, which is a recognition platform. And what's so nice about that is seeing the care and energy and collaboration and attention that people are giving each other. And it's much more powerful than just manager to their line reports. It's really about that cross-organisation, fertilisation, power of the different skills that we have.
And so for those workplaces then that might be more hybrid or remote, I guess what I'm hearing in what you're describing is then the need for them to be maybe more deliberate and purposeful in the design of maybe some of the interaction points, or I am hesitant to use the word touch points because that sounds very bullshit bingo-y. To think about those occasions where people may connect, interact, and so on, and almost just thinking carefully about how they design that to allow those connection elements or those connections to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think so many people and organisations are trying really hard to do that now. So the days when everybody might be in the office, or the team days, or making sure it's not all go into the office, take your computer, sit down and do Teams meetings all day. What is the value of being all together? How do you organise the things that you need to do together, whether it's the full team get-togethers, the team get-togethers, the development sessions, so that there's much more of that element of getting to know each other. We know that when you know each other, you're more likely to get along with people. You're more likely to be able to interact, to engage, to ask for help, to give support, to spot when things are going brilliantly, to spot when they're not going so well. So really, really important in a flexible working context to be constantly thinking. And I suspect we're going to have to experiment for a few more years yet until we find ways that truly do it. And just to make the link back to management again, I guess there is a question for me, which is, if we are going to continue working as we are, which there's no going back, there is only going forward, how are we going to support, develop, train the next managers of the future, the next leaders of the future, so that those things which used to happen by accident or by perhaps design, but loose design because we were so used to it, where people shadow, learn, overhear, etc., be mentored by, build relationships and learn. How do we get that into this new world?
Yeah, especially when you have, I guess, differing expectations or differing experiences in terms of what the makeup of the workforce. So I'm not a big fan of generational generalizations, if that makes sense. Because I just think they might be a bit overly reductionist and a bit simplistic, because I think that's clumsy language. Let me try again. In my experience, people age, some people I know that are aged between, say, 38 and 50, who you might put in a particular generational gap, their expectations and wants of the workplace are also changing. So, I think it's, and how workplaces prepare the people, the processes, and the places of work for that, for those changing expectations and change in dynamics, or change in wants, or change in opportunities, I think is really important. So as you said, the role of the manager in that can be really crucial.
I think that's right.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I 100%. Sorry,
No. You carry on.
That we need. we need to be 100% mindful. I completely agree with you about generalizations, because I think we all had an experience of things being different through COVID. So my mum became terminally ill during COVID, and I was able to go and work and live with her and work right the way through the end of her life, which I would never have been able to do had we not been in lockdown at that time, and the expectations, therefore, of work were different. But what that's given me is a sense that if that were to happen again to my dad, I would want to be with my dad throughout his final months. And I would also want to continue working, because that would be fit. Now, I may not be able to in the world that we're in now, but I was able to during COVID. So it sets up a different dynamic, and people will all have had their own experiences, whether that's being at home, living at home so that they save more money. We know that getting mortgages and rent and all those sorts of things are different. So people might have more disposable allowance, or living outside of London because it's cheaper to do so in some aspects of living. Whatever things people experienced, it's just meant that we've gone, work can be different. It doesn't have to take up so much of life. How do we make sure we can create a balanced life which work fits in? And that's happened to everybody across the generations.
Yeah. Also, I'm sorry to hear that your mum passed away. I'm sorry.
No, it's sad, and I miss her enormously. But it's the circle of life, isn't it? It's one thing that we can all guarantee is going to happen at some point, and we were really privileged. We found out in the August. I went for 2 days thinking that I'd be coming home again, and I was there for 9 months in the end, because Dad fell over and broke his femur a week before Mum died, so I had to look after him for a few months afterwards. But we got the chance to say all the things that you often don't get to say, to make sure they had some things that needed to be locked into future thinking, and sad, very sad, but also a real privilege in the experience of it.
Yeah, I think I was conscious that I didn't want to let it pass without offering my condolences. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so where that takes my thinking then is into what I think might be for some an underrated or underestimated attribute, which is about being considered or considerate. And so when we think about the design of work and so on, thinking about what that could mean, what could the impact be, how could that work for different people. So I guess for me anyway, being considerate or considering others is going to be really important. And so when we think, and I guess I'm putting myself in the listener's shoes now then, in terms of thinking, well, what are some of the things that maybe either the workplace leaders or people professionals maybe who might be listening to this podcast, what might be some of the things that they need to consider, do you think, when it comes to people's health and or mental health in the workplace, do you think?
So the key bit in all of this, Phil, it seems to me, is really how do we create workplaces in which we are kind but straight talking, but we are clear about what needs to be delivered and about the objectives and how things happen, and recognise that interpersonal relationships will also always be at play. And then how do we make sure that enough time and attention is paid to the group dynamics, the team dynamics, what is going on within our organisations, what's going on within different teams. We know that there will often be different expectations of different teams within a single organisation, and there might be different types of personalities in some rather than others. And how do you pay attention to those and recognise that those dynamics will always exist within every single organisation? And goes right back again to the issue about peers. We don't all have to like each other in a way which means that we have to spend the bank holiday weekend together, but we do have to be professional and engaging with different people who may not be like us, who have different ideas, and find ways to do that well. And so often we talk about conflict at work, when actually a lot of the time what we're talking about is people having different ideas and different opinions and needing to work out which ones are the best ones for that particular outcome. And I think it's really, language has so much power within it to help people to either deliver well and work well, or to feel as though things are difficult, challenging, and not easy to operate within. So for me, there's something about all workplaces really taking enough time and energy and thinking to work out what is it that is expected within their workplace, and how do people know about those expectations, and how do people get rewarded when they live up to those expectations, and enabled to learn, or where necessary there are sanctions where people are crossing a line within that. And it's often so much easier to address performance related to an objective rather than performance related to behaviour. And I'm sure that there are lots of people within that are listening who have been in organisations where somebody's perceived to be a high performer, even though they might be leaving all sorts of people in their wake. And for me, that isn't high performance. That's being able to get a job done, but without considering others along the way. And I think we have to get better at being able to be clear about the values and behaviours that we expect from people, as well as what we want in terms of output or outcome.
Yeah, definitely. Have you read Kim Scott's book Radical Candor? There sounded like some Kim Scott Radical Candor language in there. Yeah.
I was looking at that book just this afternoon.
Oh, right. Okay. There you go. Okay. All right. So when I think about my well-being, sort of my mental health well-being wise, and I think about the workplace, and I'm not going to include my own, or maybe I'm saying that because it's mine. So maybe I feel like that's harder for me to do in terms of my well-being within the company that I now run. But when I think back to my employed kind of roles or employed roles in my career, then the things that really helped me love my work weren't the things that were there to support my well-being. That makes sense. It wasn't the employee assistance program. It wasn't the journaling app. It wasn't the mindfulness sessions, although they weren't called that then. Yeah, that I could go and attend to, and that might sound like I'm maybe belittling or dismissing these things, and that's not what I'm trying to do. What I am advocating for, I guess, is saying that it was the connections and the relationships that I held with my colleagues and all my customers and all the people I was working with, or the residents that I was supporting when I was working for a local council. And I guess I suppose when I think about some of the narrative that I hear around the workplace and workplace well-being and workplace mental health, a lot of the focus I hear is on the employer to put in place solutions, additional solutions and support, which I think are important and have a place. So again, I'm being clear, I'm not trying to diminish or dismiss them. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like that might be an easy out rather than addressing some of maybe the more systemic or cultural aspects of what you were describing, recently in terms of the high performer with people left in their wake. So again, I run the risk of maybe sounding like I'm asking you to repeat yourself, and I suppose I just want to see if there's something else you'd like to build on from that in terms of, what are your thoughts on those systemic elements of work and their link to well-being and mental health, as opposed to maybe those solutions or those additional support mechanisms that might be put into place?
I think you're absolutely right, Phil. I believe wholeheartedly that we have to have employee assistance programs. Mental health first aiders, mental health champions, the mindfulness app or Headspace, whatever it is. I think they're really, really, really important elements. But ultimately, those are mostly the cherries, or they are. And for those who didn't get the cherries on the cake, they are not the cake. The cake has to be the work itself, the way that we design that, making sure there's enough time in our day, making sure that people feel that they can disconnect, making sure that we're not sat doing emails all the time and always on the end of a phone, believing that we can't switch off when we go on holiday, or when we're across the weekends. Getting that moment to celebrate, to be part of teams that are going to cheerlead you all of the way, fair remuneration for the work and effort that is put in. And when we can get all of that right, we also put that alongside all of the other bits. And sometimes you get people arguing, saying, well, the AAP only gets 5% take up or whatever it is. It's really important for that 5%. I've never used an EAP in my life, but I'm really grateful to know that it exists in case I need it. And that is true for, I think, so many different elements, that we only know when something is there when we need it often. And so what we mustn't do is say, if it hasn't got 50% take up, it's not needed. It's needed by the people who are using it. And through COVID, we used to do some physical exercise classes. So we had some people come in once a week. It didn't have huge take up. It was somewhere between 5 and 10% of the workforce. But for that 5 to 10%, it was a really important lifeline in that moment where people were feeling isolated and feeling lonely. So I think it's about the quality of the impact that we need to be focusing on when it comes to that support and those things outside, not how many people use it, but how important is it for the people who use it, and making sure that we're really focused around that.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask a bit of a broader question? What inspired you to advocate in this area? If that's not too big a question.
No, it's a good question. I was supposed to be an educational psychologist. That was my plan.
Okay.
And I packed my suitcase and went to Cardiff University 33 years ago. And I did the undergrad, was due to sign up to do the masters, and fell in love, did a little bit of traveling. It all went wrong. I came back, tail between my legs, and ended up working in a bar and missed the deadlines, and then got a job running a sex education project for young men in the South Wales valleys. And that was really the start of an adventure that has continued for the last 30 years. And all of that has then been in the social sector. And so I worked voluntary community social enterprise, and I worked for 20 odd years in sex education, sexual health, with some drug education, volatile substance abuse, health and wellbeing, mental health within it. And then I worked at the National Union of Students for a 3.5 year stint until I got this job at MHFA England. And I think all of my career until this point had led me to the fact that our mental health is an asset. It's an asset which we need to understand more about. We need to understand how we can look after ourselves and each other. And I often talk about us looking after our brain so our brain can look after us. And some of those things about understanding enough about the neuroscience. Why do we need to sleep? Why do we need a physical exercise? Why do we need disconnection and time to decompress and all of those sorts of things? And So when the job at MHFA England came up, it was actually this brings together so much of what I've learned before, which is our mental health is about us as humans. It is about who we are, what we believe, what drives us, and how we can manage the everyday realities of being alive, whether we've got a diagnosed mental illness or not. So that's one bit. But what has also happened since I've been at MHFA England is I've thought much more about work. I've mostly been lucky in my 30 years in that I've mostly had jobs that I've enjoyed, with people I've enjoyed working with managers who I've mostly got on with. But when I haven't had people around me who have cheerleaded and I've cheerleaded them and we've supported one another, and when I haven't had a good manager, life has been a bit miserable. And that's not just in the time between starting work in the morning and finishing at night. It actually extends into the personal life. And then have a few more arguments with the partner, and then that feeds in, and then work feels a bit worse the next day. So there's something for me which is about the quality of work and the experiences that we have at work and our mental health are really, really important for all of our lives. And things like talking about emotions at work. It's so easy for people to think of work as transaction. Work is us. It is a part of us. One of the first things that people do, rightly or wrongly, is say, where do you work? What do you do? And I know when I've not been working that when someone says, "Who are you?" I'm like, I don't know. And so for me, it's really, really important that we recognise the importance of work, the power of work, the choices that we have in relation to it, and what it does for our emotional well-being and our mental well-being in the context of work as well.
Yeah, I think the importance of just expressing how we feel in a constructive way. So I'm a big fan of Brené Brown and her work. And when I know when Brené Brown describes vulnerability, she talks about she makes a distinction to say that it's not vulnerability without censorship. So it's not vulnerability without consideration for others. And I'm inspired by that when I think about the expression of emotion. So that's something I advocate for a lot, is, getting to the creating organizations or teams or cultures in companies where everyone can say what they think and feel without fear of reprisal or censorship, and with consideration for those that are around them, and consideration of the context, and considering those different aspects. Because if there's no ability to express, then it can build up and build up and build up to what I would describe, or emotion researchers would describe, as a flooding out episode, where you then get the emotion flooding out of somebody, which could be through frustration, in which may manifest itself in behavior of shouting, or walking out, or slamming a door, or hitting a table, or it may come out in terms of overwhelm, in terms of sadness, in terms of tears and upset and crying. And so for me, if we can get in early, before we get to that flooding out episode, where that first moment where the member of the team can say to their manager, "I feel like you've let me down because you've not backed me. I'd made a recommendation, I'd made this decision, someone complained about it, and then you just undid it. And I feel let down by that because you didn't back me and you didn't support me, or you didn't bring me on the journey to why you undid the decision that I made, and I just feel a bit let down by that, and I'd like to speak about that some more, because if we can't have that discussion, then that emotion will just sit there. I say it will sit there, So if the individual does a lot of self-reflection and a lot of self-work and has their own reflective practice and emotion regulation strategies, then it might be that they can deal with that feeling that's there. But otherwise, I think what happens is we kind of push it back down and then it comes back up, and then we push it down and comes back up, push it down, comes back up, and then out it comes, as it were. But if we can be expressing what we think and what we feel on a much more regular basis in a constructive way, then I think that just makes for much better workplaces all round, really.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I guess the one thing that I think we have to be really interested and mindful about is that some people have the power and privilege to express their emotions more freely in work and society, and others than other people do. And when you look at racism in the context of work, and how emotion is monitored and understood and interpreted, those structural inequalities that exist have to be understood in order to create that truly what I describe as a liberated workplace in which you can have those conversations, and also recognize that for some people having that conversation will be really important, and for other people actually just pushing on through isn't about sweeping it under the carpet. It's about a coping strategy. And I know, for example, that I have no worries about having a disagreement or giving feedback at a point at which I need to. But in the context of work, certainly in my 20s, 30s and 40s, I would often think, is this worth a conversation? What happens? And particularly as it got more senior, what happens if you have this conversation? Does the issue become bigger than it might be? And I always remember when I first started going out with my husband, one of the first arguments he said, "Are we going to finish over this?" And I said, "Well, no." And he said, "Well, is it worth the argument then?" And that really stuck in my brain, that sometimes it is. It's worth the conversation, it's worth the discussion. But other times, when we've said something, there is sometimes a greater meaning attached to it by the other person than is actually meant from it. So I think there's a really interesting balance, and I love having the conversation about what we believe is worth talking about and what we don't, because so often we have completely different expectations about the things. By having a conversation, how much importance is placed on it.
Yeah. And from your experiences then, whether that be, I guess, personally in that example or professionally, what, if any, or if there were some suggestions or recommendations that you might have for the listener, what might they be?
Recommendations. Is there any parameter on it, or can I give any recommendations?
Well, I suppose in particular, I was thinking. So yes, we can broaden it out. We can definitely broaden it out shortly. I suppose in what I was thinking of building on that element that we were just exploring around the meaning or the weight of the meaning that the hearer may place on something versus the weight of the meaning that the speaker may have on it. So I may speak something which I may feel has a light weight to it, whereas it might be heard with a heavy weight. And or I guess is it, are we going to end over this? No, therefore, is it worth it? So I suppose it was that bit in particular, I suppose I was thinking of in terms of the recommendations bit. It's because how might you judge where that line is when it is, how do you judge the weightiness, and or when do you decide? And I guess maybe my question's too big, because the right answer, an appropriate answer might be, well, I can't say that, Phil, because all conversations are different and so on. But I guess I felt like it was a conversation, a question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it. I think I just wanted to check I understood what it is, so that's really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So the key thing for me would be just really make sure that we think about it and know why we want it. Is there something that we want to change? Is there something that we want to learn? Is there something that that person needs to know in order to move things forward? And make sure that what we are not doing is just saying something and not thinking about how it might be received and about the impact. And so that was, I think we've mentioned it earlier, the difference between being nice, in which we may not say anything at all for fear of offending, and being kind, which might be saying it, but with thoughtfulness and with due care and with clarity about what might need to be done differently. And one of the things that none of us will ever know is about why people behave in the way that they do in a particular situation, and what it is about the situation, the circumstance, the conversation, which is creating a response that we don't know. So that bit you often see, be kind, everyone's fighting their own battles, or whatever it is. And I think that whole notion about understanding that what you see and hear may not be the be all and end all, that there may be lots of things going on under the surface that we've interpreted through our frame of reference rather than through theirs, and then seeking clarification. So that thoughtfulness, going, this just happened and the impact that it had on me was this, can I just check before assuming the challenge, I think, is where I would just come from in relation to that.
I agree. And I say that there are sort of two or three phrases that that I advocate, or I use, and I advocate for use. One of those is building on the theme that humans are meaning-making machines. So we see things, we hear things, we interpret things, we experience things, and then we make them mean something. So one thing I'll use both personally and professionally is I'll say, so I'm making what you just said mean that, and then insert my interpretation. And is that what is my meaning what you meant? Because if I'm making it mean something different to what you meant, then I want to understand that. So I'm making that mean that you think that I'm not listening to you, that I'm overruling you, and that I'm a bad boss. Is that what you mean? Because that's what I'm making it mean. I don't know if that's true or not. So let's go and explore that. So one of that is I'm making that mean. That's one of my favorite kind of openings. A second one is so what I'm hearing then is, and then give my summary of what I'm hearing. Is that correct? Is that accurate? Yeah. Is there something I've missed or misrepresented or misinterpreted? And then the third, again, is a Brown inspired one, which is the story I'm telling myself now then is. So having heard that, the story I'm telling myself now is, insert summary of the story. Again, is that right? Is that correct? And I find those three frames and that process really beneficial for me from an emotion regulation or emotion management perspective, because it means that I have some time to think about my response before I just come back in with it. So if I've heard something that I might find difficult, or the individual might find difficult to say, by clarifying the meaning or the intent or the story or whatever it would be, it buys me time to consider my response, buys me time to regulate my emotions a little bit as well. And it also pays reference to and respect to the other individual to say, I want to make sure I understand you clearly. I want to make sure that we're of the same understanding in terms of what you intended it to mean versus what I've heard, because speaker intent and hearer meaning can be two very different things. And I think it also helps that individual as well, because what they're not getting is that what might be a stereotypical immediate response or reaction from me. What they're getting is a more considered response in that way, I suppose. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, Phil. And the interesting bit, of course, is what I've heard is can be quite cognitive. The story I'm telling myself, is a really generous gift that you're giving somebody, because it's often plays into some of our biggest vulnerabilities. If you're willing to say, you said that, and the meaning that I have taken from it, and the story I'm now telling myself is this, this, and this, can be opening yourself up, which is where we feel safe to do so. How powerful is that? And yeah, nice. Thank you. I've taken something away from this podcast just in that last 2 minutes with those three little phrases.
Okay. In which case, you're welcome, and thank you, because I don't think we'd have got there if it wasn't for you. So that's really good. All right. So as we start to move, then I guess in towards the kind of final section of the podcast, we talked about. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, from thinking about how do we design work in a way that is beneficial for people's health. We've spoken about the importance of connection, of purpose, of connecting with each other. We've talked about how the importance of the manager and how managers, 88%, I think it was, you said, from the Charter Management Institute piece of research, in terms of they find themselves into the way of a manager. We've talked about potential conflicts. We've talked about the importance of peers. We've talked about a whole. I suppose we've covered a whole range of areas, which is fantastic, because that's what we said we wanted to do at the start, which is have a really great conversation. And maybe maybe I'm being overly simplistic or overly reductionist. And I think I'll go ahead and try and do that anyway, in terms of asking, before we move into the final phase. Yeah, what might be your things for because we talked about considering and being considerate a lot. So what might be some final considerations you would give for the listener to think about, in terms of, whether it be, workplace health, mental health? What might be some of the final considerations you would give?
I think we've talked a lot about the organisation and about leaders and managers and peers in the context of the organisation. And I would really like to remind us that even when we may not feel like we've got choices, we all have choices, and we all have power and accountability. Not always all at the same time, not always able to act on choices, and there will always be things which impact on them. But making sure that we have our agency, and that we take accountability for the choices and decisions that we do make about both what we do, how we do it, and who we do it with. And sometimes I worry that we underestimate how much choice we have, how much power we have, both in terms of a mindset of where we are, but also in where we want to be and how we want to get there. And I remember one particular job where I was really, really miserable. And I was so miserable that I didn't have the energy to find another job. And I needed to have a break, but I also didn't have enough money to be able to say, I'm handing in my notice. And in the end, I did hand in my notice without having another job. And immediately having done so, I found the energy to look for another job and to then find another job. And it was a really important lesson, which was sometimes when you're at a low ebb, that having the energy which you need to make the change is really difficult. but just making a small change can create a different energy flow to enable us to do some things differently. And in a world where we can feel like everything happens quickly and in a way that is about others doing things to us, taking that power and accountability is really, really, I want to say powerful again, and it is powerful, but special. Mm-hmm. It's important.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, all right. So as we move into the final kind of closing sections then, Simon has wonderfully outlined the case for shifting the discourse on mental health at work. And as you know, we are passionate about shifting the discourse around emotions at work. The link between constructively engaging with all our emotions on a moment-to-moment basis massively improves mental health and well-being in the workplace. So if your workplace would be willing to engage with analysis, then we'll work with you to shape the advice and application that you need to create a team or a workplace which harnesses all emotion for the good of colleagues. Don't know where to start? I do. Contact us now on hello@emotionatwork.co.uk. And now, back to the show. When you look back now, what has surprised you about your experience with well-being and mental health in the workplace?
Lots of surprises, lots of them very good. The passion, the energy, the commitment, the willingness, the desire to eradicate stigma, to create workplaces is enormous. And I think that's really, really powerful. And that's reflected in the work that people do, the training they provide, putting in EAPs, mental health first aiders, doing speakers, having leaders talk about their own experience. We see so much that is very, very different than it was 15 to 20 years ago, and that's incredible. I think that the surprise, which is one which we will be able to navigate through into the next phase, because of course if you've had an issue which people don't feel comfortable talking about, is going to be more difficult to you're not going to move to the perfect place, but it feels as though we are using the same words to describe such different experiences, from well-being for everybody through to trying to make sure that the most the most vulnerable or people with real challenges within the context of work getting the support that they need. And somehow we've got to develop more nuance in relation to it. And then perhaps that there is still a slight desire for the new, the shiny, and the silver bullet. And in my view, there is never going to be a silver bullet, that we've got to get the basics right, which is mostly about human connection and human relationship and ability to have good quality conversation and to spot signs and symptoms. And then finally, an unintended consequence, I think, of this brilliant focus on mental health is that it feels as though it can be difficult to talk about joy and pleasure and the importance of good quality work, and that the public narrative is much more about managing stress and about the challenges of work. And to be really, really, really crystal clear, I think that it is really, really, really important to talk about stress and the challenges of work and to really focus on that. And at the same time, to be really clear that work designed well is good for us and that we should be talking about that as much as we do so that we can really make sure that there is a belief that work will be good for us. There's a belief that work is positive and can be positive, and not in a positive, a toxic positivity way. In a real way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Okay. All right. So last few questions then as we come to an end. What are there particular books or videos or, kind of TED Talks or things like that you might recommend for people that you think, if they're interested in some of the areas that we've explored and discussed, that if they wanted to find out more or have some wider reading or inspiration, what might that be?
So Find Your Why, Simon Sinek, is
wonderful.
one which I think is just a really, really, really good book. I've also brought in Pleasure Activism, the politics of feeling good. Just to the last point that I was saying about talking about things, I think this is a really important thing for us all to think about. What does feeling good and joy mean in a political context as well as a human context? I tend not to listen to business podcasts, but I do listen to an awful lot of story sort of type podcasts. And Desert Island Discs, I think, is from a work and inspiration and learning perspective, the archive is just quite incredible in terms of the stories of people, and similarly autobiographies and people's lives would be where I take learning. I'm much better at hearing a story and working out what it means for me than I am reading a business book. I mean, I've tried my best. I have a pile of all of the books, but have I ever read them? Not in a way that some people would call reading. I've skimmed them, I've underlined bits, and I've taken bits of inspiration. And then things, you talked about TED Talks. I think the most interesting thing about this is just having a dive in and seeing that, within 2 or 3 minutes whether it's going to be of interest to you. And so I do like, when I go to the gym, I do like sort of moving around and trying to find a way to find things that are interesting. And TED Talks would be a place. Desert Island Discs would be a place. Just started listening to David Baddiel and Baroness Vazi's podcast, A Muslim and a Jew. Do the rest is books. Those sorts of podcasts. Or I can tell you the myriad of podcasts I listen to about eventing and horse riding, but probably don't want those in the context of this particular podcast.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And I'm sure they're great for your well-being and your mental health as well, so that's good. Okay.
Exactly.
All right then. If people wanted to get hold of you and they wanted to ask you something more, how would you like people to get hold of you?
So I'm on LinkedIn under Simon Blake, Mental Health First Aid England. That's probably the easiest way to get hold of me. If people want to find out about Mental Health First Aid England, our website is mhfaengland.org. And similarly, we've got a LinkedIn page which has got information and resources and all sorts of things on that page. And similarly on Instagram and on Facebook. It's all Mental Health First Aid England, and you'll find us through those.
Wonderful. And we'll put links to all of those channels in the show notes as well. All right then. So our final question, is there something else then, Simon? Something else, something more that you're thinking, feeling, or would like to say before we come to a close?
I would like to say thank you. How brilliant is it that we are now living in a world where people are talking about emotions at work? We are not thinking of ourselves as robots, but as humans that go into work and work with other people. And that these conversations hopefully trigger ripples, create ripples into other bits, and the people listening, hopefully you will take something. We've said something in a 30-second snippet, or a couple of minutes, which will cause to pause and think, or provoke, or disagree with us. But either way, that it means the conversation keeps on moving, improving, and that we recognise that if we can be truly human at work, then we will deliver the best that we possibly can. It'll be rewarding for us and brilliant for business too.
Well, look at that. I don't think I could end it any better. All right, then. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you. You've been an amazing guest. And thank you to you and to our wonderful listeners. Thank you, fair listener. And I'll say to everyone listening and to you, Simon, listen well to yourself. And if you can, listen well to someone else too. Thanks for listening.